You continue to question why Donald Duck doesn't wear pants, yet you ignore the much more horrifying implications of why Mickey Mouse needs to. What the fuck am I listening to? Chapter 2, We're All Just Meat by Joe Finsternis. Once during Paul's adult years, he was lying down on a bed in the ER. He did not know that he was in an emergency room. He did not know why the nurses continued to press their knuckles down on his chest. He had a bruise there later. He would return later still to return their caresses with dull blades shielding his knuckles. He had never done drugs in his life. He wasn't having a seizure. He was only pretending to be asleep, for he was thinking of the man who gave him the ugly look. He did not seem like a nice man. Paul did not like his face. He took the potato peeler that he carried around in his back pocket, tapped the ugly man on the shoulder, and politely asked him a question. 3 hours later, Paul was in an emergency room where the nurses were aggressively attempting to wake him. They knew that he was not really passed out, and they needed him to leave so that the bed would be available to someone who needed it. Paul likes pretending to be asleep after he murders someone, so that he can reminisce on what he's committed while it's still fresh in the fetid container of his skull. This is his very favorite hobby, because it aids in his genital lactation. You should not grow up to be like Paul. You may live under the false pretense that evil people all get along with each other, just like the Skeleton Man and his friends in the animated program about masturbating the universe. In reality, the exact opposite of this is the truth. A truly evil person gets along with no one, and they are perfectly comfortable living that way. It was the very day after Paul had hideously disfigured and heinously murdered that defenseless feline. Be forewarned, he did kill more, for to him animals were like Pringles. On a positive note, the bird population in his immediate area thrived. Nature healed thanks to Paul. He and Frederick, co-star of the previous chapter, were approaching each other in the hallway. There were several other children present. Frederick could not wait to inflict pain upon Paul. He was thinking of taking the index and middle finger of his right hand and pinching Paul's flesh on his side. He was already giggling in delight, thinking of the sounds that puny Paul might make. Paul could not wait for Frederick to be close to him. He was watching the flesh on the large child's chest as he walked. He would be thinking of this 2 evenings later as he had his very first moist dream. Are you feeling comfortable at the moment? Do you wish for me to climb in through your window this evening and tuck you in? I'll give you belly rubs as well, if you ask in a sweet manner. Just as Frederick stood within 5 feet of Paul, Paul held up his right arm in front of him. Frederick immediately ceased to move forward, for he was too stupid to realize he could have easily sprained Paul's elbow with a casual wave of his left arm. He was nervous. What talents did the smaller child suddenly possess? Frederick did not feel guilty for his bullying shenanigans in the slightest, but he did feel scared at the thought of what someone would wish to do unto him after all of the things he had done unto Paul. Paul might do something cruel and awful, like hit him really hard. Paul has never been, and still isn't, an admirable fellow, but he is intelligent. It is more blissful to be foolish and kind than smart and evil, and Paul knows very good and well that hitting Frederick would only result in more physical pain for Paul. Paul opened his red mouth and vomited forth the words, "If you touch me or take my food when you're not hungry again, I will masturbate you in front of everyone, and they will all laugh at you, because then they'll think you're a homosexual faggot who likes other boys." I wanted this chapter to be more funny than the previous one, because of how truly awful and bleak it was. Before I made the promise that I love you, and promises are fine china. All of the other children had stopped walking as soon as they had seen Frederick and Paul grow close, for they knew that they were about to witness something interesting. None of them were speaking. After hearing the words that Paul had spoken, a few of them even stopped breathing for multiple seconds. Their souls are currently writhing in the fecal rivers of hell. It's just like floating on a lazy river, except it isn't relaxing or enjoyable. I know, because I just saw their faces yesterday afternoon. I was giggling when I wrote that last statement. My hobbies are for fun. Oh yeah, so you're probably wondering what the children were all thinking. I shall convey this by describing their actions and vocal projections to you. Every single child who heard the statement of Paul proceeded to laugh audibly, loudly, and every single one of them pointed their index fingers in Frederick's direction. They were calling him things that he did not want them to call him. Frederick was not alive the next day. He had severed his own genitals with a stapler. He had really liked pretty girls when he was alive, but not anymore now that they're touching him in hell. And since all of the pretty girls who resided in the same orphanage as him, including the teenage ones who were the same size and proportions as him, all falsely believed that he was a homosexual child who had just exited the closet in front of a large group of small human beings, he knew that they would never want to touch his penis or his testicles. So he decided that he no longer had use for these body parts. Obviously, none of the nuns ever mentioned this in earshot of the children. It was announced the following morning that young Frederick was no longer present, but the Mother Superior did not describe the way in which he had taken his life, for this would not have been appropriate, and a quarter of the orphans would have been unable to consume their morning meals upon hearing of this. The Mother Superior thought it was juicy gossip, though. She wrote a chapter about it later on in her autobiography, Why You Mother. I was being honest with you when I informed you that these nuns were decent people. I almost called them nuts. That only means that they behaved politely towards other people, for they were among the relatively good members of the Christian population. It figures I would stutter that, and like every decent person who has ever been born, they often made imperfect decisions. For example, they decided to have Paul and Frederick sleep within the same chamber. Forgive them, humble listener. They were merely adults, flesh-made human beings responsible for the provisions of several younger people. After all, you know the old saying about the road to hell. As a result of this admittedly reckless decision, Paul was there to witness every second of Frederick's last night on earth. And that is the story of the first time that Paul had used his own hand to ejaculate. Have a wonderful night, blessed reader. I hope you follow the right steps in filing that restraining order. Good night.